There are many concerns and controversies about very compressed social and demographic changes in South Korea. In order to understand the underlying mechanism of the relationship between social change and demographic transition, and to contrive proper policies and practices, we would like to suggest a historical and structural perspective of the how present social characteristics and people's way of life have been constructed historically. In this aspect, we examine the origin and development of the present social characteristics and demographic transition over the past 5 decades in Korea. Three subjects are particularly emphasized in this presentation. First, a preliminary idea is suggested about the dynamic interrelationship between economic development and demographic changes in Korea. Second, we present how the concept and practices of family planning started and developed, and which of the main implications of the family planning program should be considered. Furthermore, we elaborate on several important effects and implications of family planning program in the demographic transition and social change in Korea. Finally, we address some issues and policy implications on the very low fertility, rapid aging, and international migration. In our presentation, we'll show you 3 different sets of materials, videotapes on the economic, political, and demographic histories, interviews with prominent Korean demographers who are directly involved with the National Family Planning Program, and PowerPoint slides, which will show the economic and demographic transition in South Korea. Let's first watch the videotape on how South Korea has changed over the last 5 decades.
Oppan Gangnam Style.
Korean society represents one of the societies with the most compressed social changes. Korea was liberated from Japanese colonial rule in 1945. Despite the people's wish and efforts, it was very difficult to make a national society. Korea was divided into North and South Korea. Soon after, the Korean War broke out. Korean people were very poor and politics were very unstable. Finally, a military coup was forced by Park Chung-hee, and he became the president. Right after his assumption of the power, the National Economic Plan was initiated. The National Family Planning Program was launched and developed from 1961 to the early 1990s. Korea's economy began to take off and developed rapidly. Korea also achieved political democratization against the authoritarian leadership in the late 1980s. Present day, Korea is a high-income society, leading the high-technology industry and spreading its cultural influence. The figures show some indicators about economic development in Korea. Education levels increased largely. Nearly 80% of high school graduates enroll in college and universities, which marks as one of the highest education levels in the world. Along with such compressed development and social changes, demographic transition also occurred dramatically. Natural increase rate declined largely. Due to low fertility and prolonged life expectancy, the age structure has been increasingly aging and illustrating spindle shape. The aging of the population is also rapid. It is estimated that in only 18 years, the population aged 65 and over will increase from 7% to 14%, which is even shorter than Japan, known as the very rapidly aging society. There must be a close relationship between such compressed development and demographic transition, and the relation between the economic development and demographic change in Korea is the outcome and process of comprehensive social change called modernization. On the one hand, modernization of Korea involved the common trend with those of many societies, due to economic and technological development and some diffusing powers. But it is also worthwhile to emphasize that modernization of Korea was the result of a historical and cultural process. Modernization of Korea was launched by the people's strong anxiety for development and desire to create a strong nation after they experienced the hardship of Japanese colonization, division of nations, the Korean War, and poverty. People were passionately joining subsequent projects of making a modern society and exiting from poverty. Along with the rapid replacement and interaction between old and new ideas, and between diffusing and aboriginal forces, people's concepts and practices have also been blended by conflicting elements. In this distinct historical and cultural process of modernization in Korea, family planning has a special meaning. The National Family Planning Program started to aim at birth control and economic development. It was a model project of making Korean society modern and was influential in launching and disciplining the idea and practice of modernity and development at the national level. Through the massive movement of family planning, Korean society was likely to consolidate its prototypical characteristics as a developmental society. The following videotaped interviews tell the story about the origins and effects of the National Family Planning Program in South Korea. We would like to note that the first person appearing on the video is Dr. Yang Jae-mo, a 94-year-old retired physician.
I had the privilege to travel European countries in early 1960, beginning from Swiss and England and all the European countries. As a social welfare study fellow, WHO fellowship, and it started from early January of 1960. And I had the privilege to visit all the European countries, but even though I was fellow of studying social welfare system of European countries, I learned that the more urgent problem is not in social welfare organization, but in how to control our population growth rate. Therefore, I had a chance to visit the IPPF headquarters in London, and this related with the visit of IPPF Vice President and Chairman of the IPPF to Korea in 1960 June of 1960, who asked if we are interested in organizing family planning program in Korea, then IPPF can support about $3,000 per year for 3 years. This encouraged me to organize family planning program from 1960 October.
In 1961, the Supreme Council of the National Reconstruction, led by late President Park, put top priority on the economic development of Korea. They recognized the need to reduce the high population growth rate for the goal of the economic growth. Leaders from PPFK, including Dr. Jae Mo-young, played a pioneering role for the government to adopt the family planning program as a national policy. Since then, the National Family Planning Program is mostly run under the auspices of Ministry of Health and Health and Social Affairs at the time.
In retrospective Korean economy in 1950s, Korea's national income per capita was less than $100, which was lower than that of Africa today. Therefore, Korea has not any choice. So Korea focused on the primary goal of economic development. The Korean government at that time also CP, Command Plan. After that, when I participated in the fourth economic plan at the request of Korean government, I proposed to accept a French system, IP, indicative plan, by benchmarking French economist Jean Monnet.
Program is mostly run through the infrastructure of public health organization of the whole world, whole nation. And in 1975, the Population Policy Coordinating Committee was established under the Ministry of Economic Planning Board. Since then, ministries of the government related to the population issues participated in the family planning program. So we can call it as an integrated approach for the family planning program. And the integrated approach expanded to the grassroots level through the health workers.
많은 사람들이 가족 계획이 시작되기 전에 이미 산하 제한 방법을 구하고 있었다는 거죠. 그래가지고 굉장히 사람들이 소가족을 원하고 대가족으로 인해서, 그러니까 자녀가 많음으로 인해서 굉장히 경제적인 부담을 느끼고 있었고, 그러던 차에 가족계획 사업이 시작이 되니까 그걸 갖다가 그냥 물 빨아들이듯이 그냥, 그러니까 스펀지가 물 빨아들이듯이 굉장히 급속하게 빨아들였다는 거지.
I'd like to present the benefit of the family planning program in terms of family health. The National Family Planning Program emphasized the child health program and promotion of the productive right. The productive right supports women to decide what kind of contraceptives, to choose the method preference, and to protect herself from the reproductive disease. The maternal health responsible for pregnancy and childbirth would usually represent the health status of all family members. The woman's health, including the maternal health, is very important for the promotion of the community health all over the countries. I'd like to give you one small evidence what the relationship between family planning and women's health. In 1962, when we started the program, the infant mortality was 85 per thousand live births, but the figure is come down slowly, but is very significant meaning.
I think family planning program in Korea had contributed to many aspects of Korean development in Korean society. I would like to mention about the development of Korean research technology, methodology. In 1962, the survey technique was not very much developed at that time, but through the program of a baseline survey in family planning projects, we have developed questionnaire construction and research design, and also many other techniques in interpretation and analysis. For example, by the time there was no study of experiment control programs in Korea about social, human society, but the program aimed at the experimental program, and it was very much successful, and it had been widely known in the world with the program of Taichung study in Taiwan, and also many scholars could develop and study the research techniques through this program.
There are diverse views on the origins and the consequences of the National Family Planning Program in Korea. Nevertheless, many people addressed that all conditions were ready before the National Family Planning Program was launched. Population pressure to control fertility control was internalized in the poverty and the high natural increase rate and return migration. According to a survey result conducted in 1962 in a rural area, just short after the implementation of the National Family Planning, most respondents responded that they preferred birth control. Despite their preference of birth control, the survey found that more than half of the respondents did not know any methods of contraception, and very few had used some types of contraception. The survey result also found that the ideal number of children was smaller than the actual figure of TFR at that time. In addition, sons were preferred over daughters for reasons of security in old age and continuing family lineage. Respondents addressed the cost of living and education as the reasons for less preferring daughters. For the other conditions for the National Family Planning, it is also noted that people were very flexible toward new concepts, techniques, and foreign aids after they underwent colonial rule, the U.S. military government, and the Korea War. Many developing countries were liberated after World War II. The poverty and large population growth in these developing countries became the main concern of the international politics and security. Through the many discourses on population control and economic development at the international level, the concept of family planning as a promoter of economic development became consolidated. In this influence of international population politics and discourse, various types of financial and technical supports from international organizations helped Korean researchers and policymakers to gain the knowledge on the population control. In this context, the family planning program has progressed sincerely. The first step was pushed from non-governmental agents. Dr. Yang Jae-mo established the Korean Planned Parenthood Federation in April 1961 under the support of the International Planned Parenthood Federation. Shortly after the establishment of KPPF, a military coup by Park Chung-hee occurred, and Spring Council of the National Reconstruction adopted the family planning program as the national reconstruction policy, and include one key element of the economic development plans. Under the collaboration of the government, KPPF, social science researchers, and field service workers, the family planning program was launched enthusiastically afterwards. Also, the National Family Planning Program was successful due to the effective mobilization of grassroots organizations such as the Mothers Club. International organizations also played important roles in providing financial and technical support for the family planning program. The objective of family planning was clearly identified. It aimed at birth control and economic development. Concrete targets were established and updated to diffuse attitude, knowledge, and methods of birth control. The abstract goal of the modernization of life was also continuously delivered to the people's mind. At last, in the interplay of the family planning program with the subsequent social changes, population growth began to slow down. Women's reproductive behaviors changed to having small families. TFR declined from 5 to 6 in the early 1960s to 2 in the 1980s. Women using some form of contraception increased substantially. The figure shows the increase in various methods of contraception that women and men used. While the use of contraceptive methods increased, it is also worthwhile to note the rapid rise in the use of induced abortion. The posters of the family planning show how the slogan's expression and connotation have changed. The posters in the 1960s said let's have an adequate number of children and raise them well, and happier family through family planning. The posters of the 1970s expressed the target of birth control became concrete as two. Also delivered the message that a way to young and beautiful life is family planning. A famous soccer star joined the campaign and made a promise to the public, his practice of having small family. Family planning was mostly targeted toward women, but also encouraged men to participate. Posters were made to encourage men's vasectomy. Posters also delivered the message against the preference of sons over daughters. As the population reached more than 40 million in the early 1980s, the government alarmed the population crisis and shifted to birth control in a more restrictive way. Posters in the 1980s delivered the trial to shift infertility norm from 2 children being ideal number to 1 child and to stop the tendency of some preference. There are diverse views and controversies about the merits and demerits of the national family planning. Now we address several issues on the family planning program. First, the family planning program, along with other social changes, was very influential in diffusing the value, knowledge, and methods of birth control. But it is also noted that birth control was targeted under the top-down policy. The rapid decline in fertility was partly due to the abuse of induced abortion and export of unwanted babies. The national family planning kept rigorous birth control even when the social conditions increasingly induced fertility decline, without concern on the social and demographic consequences of the strictly targeted birth control and fertility decline. The sex ratio at birth rose until the early 1990s due to the prenatal sex selection. The National Family Planning is not just a campaign for birth control. It was implemented with the aim of achieving national construction and happy families. Through the campaign, people learned and embodied the development perspective. Individuals' drive for success, development, social mobility, and high competition for educational investment were embodied collectively under the National Campaign for the Family Planning. The Family Planning Program has important implications in changes in Korean women's status. Women were the main target of birth control and became main agents to diffuse the idea and practice of birth control. Women's active participation was partly due to their strategy to enhance their status through the settlement of nuclear families. While not the intended consequences, the National Modern Family Project helped to empower women as they took on the roles of main reproducers and caregivers, independent of the influence of the patriarchal extended family. However, another implication of the enforcement of women's identity as housewives and educational mothers is that women themselves have been entrenched within the family. This explains the distinct development of education, work, and family life of Korean women. Despite the high increase in educational levels, women's economic participation has not been active. Women's economic participation has formed a M shape until recently, implying that most women experienced career interruption during the child-rearing period. The discriminative environments of the labor market discouraged highly educated women from actively participating until the early 2000s. Before the massive diffusion of attitudes, knowledge, and methods of modern contraception, there was only limited intervention of medical technology on reproduction. Contraception and induced abortion were prohibited during the colonial period. Social perception of nurses and midwives was negative during the colonial period because Korea's traditional beliefs preferred women to get married early and avoid outside activity. While medical and healthcare services had extended through the Korean War, it is a family planning that marks the beginning of the full-scale intervention of medical services in reproduction. The family planning program has an important implication in family change. Although the concept of a family continues to exert important influence on Korean people's lives, the strong family orientation of Korean people has produced many inner conflicts. It is partly due to the rivalry competition between the extended family and nuclear family. The power relations have also changed with more influence of the nuclear family ideas. As a result, the sense of parental responsibility became strong, and children were more likely to rely on parents' resources. By contrast, while the number of elderly people largely increased, old age security became insecure. Rapid decline of family support and stagnant state welfare might be responsible for insecurity in later life. Also, the strong belief about the normal families imposed the rigidity on the other family types. Conclusively, the family planning program had a pervasive influence on fertility decline by diffusing the values, knowledge, and the methods of birth control, promoting moral check of self-reliance and parental responsibility, and embodying the practice in which people plan life, birth, education, work, marriage, for their secular success and social mobility. Fertility decline seems to hit to the extreme. TFR dropped from 6 in the early 1960s to 1.23 in 2013. There is no more sex preference, signifying a change of children's value. The share of births by mothers in the 30s increased largely. Actual number of children began to be lower than the ideal number of children since the 1980s. In terms of the relative influence of factors for fertility decline, we found that fertility decline until the late 1980s was mainly due to the decline in marital fertility. On the other hand, fertility decline since the early 1990s or mainly due to the delay in marriage age. In 2010, mean age at first marriage was 31 for men, 29 for women. Nowadays, there are many concerns for the very low fertility in Korea. The following video introduced the present culture of marriage, reproductive behavior, and child rearing.
Latest figures from Statistics Korea show that the number of people who got married this past March was more than 23,000 people, down 16% from the same month last year. This is the fifth straight month the number has declined, and the lowest it's been since 2008. Data also shows the number of babies born in March fell 10.2% from the same month a year earlier to just under 39,000. The lowest level in 32 years. Only some 13% of unmarried Korean women considered getting married as essential, which was half the rate of their male counterparts. Compared to the same survey conducted in 2009, the gender gap grew by almost 7%, with more women saying no to marriage at a faster pace. But for both sexes, the main reason for avoiding or delaying marriage was due to concerns of job security and a lack of savings. An average of 86% of men and women said they didn't have a stable job or the money to pay for a wedding. Kim Seung-kwon of Korea's Health Institute says the fading value of marriage is hampering the recovery of the country's low birth rate.
Only 58% of Koreans in their 20s were employed last year, down by 3 percentage points from a decade earlier. The quality of jobs they get has also declined. The number of young people who start their career as short-term contract workers has surged in recent years to account for 1 in every 5 last year. To get a competitive edge in the job market, college students spend most of their campus life equipping themselves with various qualifications. They apply for internships, take foreign language tests, and participate in contests.
From buying the milk and school books and sending kids to academies, parents often pay a high price to raise their children. But how much does it really cost to raise a child here in Korea? The answer, over 300 million won, or about $263,000 US. The figures come from a new report released by the Ministry of Health and Welfare based on last year's survey of 18,000 households in the country. On average, the report shows that each household spends a little over $1,000 a month on each child. That's high, even compared to just a few years back. In 2003, it cost about $660 US a month, and in 2009, a little less than $900. The high cost of raising children in Korea has been blamed as one of the reasons for the nation's low birth rate, which stands as one of the lowest in the world, at 1.23 kids per household last year.
So there's like hagwons on hagwons on hagwons.
So many hagwons, yeah.
That is crazy.
Yeah. Oh, because there's a hagwon. On one building, is it 3 or 5 or 10 hagwons?
Oh, so one building can have 10 hagwons.
From what we've gathered so far on our trip here, it seems that everyone is kind of being forced to have the same motivations and study for their family and study in order to get into a good college.
There is a limited limited members that can go to good universities, and lots of students want to go there. So it's very competitive in Korea, so that's why they get so pressured.
In Korea, I think in Korea, university determines quite a lot of many parts of life. If you take the exam bad, that means your life going to be worse. So I think that's the main reason why we feel stressful.
So you do homework. So some of you, when you get home after night school.
Yeah.
So when do you go to bed?
11, 12.
11, 12.
11:30.
11:30, 12. That's late. Early is.
I was never allowed to stay up that late.
Yeah. How old are you guys?
12.
12. 13. So does your studying worlds and your school worlds, do they very much connect to your social worlds?
Yes.
So you're, like, how do you associate your schoolwork with your social work? Why do you think that happens?
I have a friend that is very high scores and tests, and then, for example, when she got 100, I got one wrong, and then in my mind, I'm so sad and I want to be the first place.
Right.
So, like, at home, I study very hard and we get to compete to each other.
Right.
The images tell us the cost of reproduction is very high. The interpreter also said that Korean people all think they must be successful for the sake of family. It is noted that the high cost for childbirth and marriage is the individual translation of the structural pressure for the birth and marriage control, and this demographic pressure for birth and marriage control has bubbled up in the highly developmental society. People are forced to competitively invest in education, take too much into consideration the cost and benefit of marriage and birth, impose too much burden on parental responsibility, and exclude many elderly people from communities and families. These all are too many checks on life, unsettling our community. Present unsettling demographic phenomena are closely related to one another. Low fertility and delayed marriage are related to the Malthusian moral and instrumental check to generate the fittest. High and rising suicide rates of the elderly imply another population check to the surplus population. The trend of multiculturalism was confined by instrumental and family interest. All these may signal the alteration or dissolution of compressed modernity constructed over the last half-century. Development was regarded to be imperative for preserving better equilibrium between resource and population. Although diverse views and controversies are still in progress, family planning was launched as a national project to construct modernity and development. As a result, Korea became a highly developed and family-centered society. But Korea now faces a paradox of developmentalism and familism, which imposes too many checks on our lives. Very low fertility is regarded as a serious social concern in South Korea. The Korean government has contrived diverse policy approaches to provide various incentives for reproductive behaviors. The new government of President Park Geun-hye pledged to provide financial support for childbirth and education more extensively than ever before. Setting aside the question whether the promise could be fulfilled given the limited budget, there are concerns as to whether the incentive approach for the individual rational choice would achieve its intended policy outcome without proper checks to the endlessly rising cost of reproduction. Also, we would like to comment on adopting or benchmarking the Western welfare state models. Through this presentation, we emphasized the historical and cultural process of Korean modernization, adopting and benchmarking the foreign concept, and experiencing the complex hybridization between the local and global, between the new and traditional elements. We underwent very distinct pathways to modernity. One solution in one context is not likely to be effective in the other context. This is why we have emphasized the structural and historical perspective on the demographic transition and proper policy and practices.